All right, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning into our Industry Insights webinar. My name is Allison Kim, and I'm Marketing Coordinator here at Latera Microsystems. Before I kick off today's session on keeping up to date with updates, I'd like to run through a few quick items. The webinar will run for 30 minutes, and there will be time for a Q&A. If you have any questions during the session, please submit them into our questions panel, and we'll make sure to get to them at the end. Moving along, I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Chuck Henricks, Document Lifecycle Evangelist. With extensive experience in working with technical professionals, Chuck is a wonderful advocate when it comes to understanding the best practices and tools covering the complete document lifecycle. With that said, Chuck, it's all yours.
Okay, well, thanks, Allison. Yes. In addition to being a product manager and working in IT, I've spent a lot of time installing, uninstalling, and updating and testing software. So this topic that we're talking about, keeping up to date with updates, is close to my heart and actually really important. So today's agenda is, first and foremost, why should we keep up to date? Why is it important to stay on the latest version, or is it actually? We're also going to talk about the environmental factors in IT that impact on how you update and when. And that includes software installation methods. How can you manage your applications more easily? Vendors can help with that if they do their job right and give you the right tools and the right information. And there's quite a few things that you can do to make your updating life easier, so we'll touch on some of them. The first question, why update? Well, there's really a number of reasons, but the three key reasons, in my opinion, are security first. Windows is constantly being updated for security reasons, as well as adding new enhancements. But that's true for your DMS, that's true for your browsers, that's true for any of your applications that have any kind of exposure to the outside world. So your antivirus, for example, it's super important to keep that up to date. Functionality is also really important. Vendors spend a lot of time researching how to make their applications easier to use or extend the functionality, and it's great to be able to deliver that to your users. But you also need to maintain compatibility, and that's something that can come into play either because you're updating your infrastructure, like your operating system or your document management system or your practice management system, or you're updating other applications and you need to make sure that they cooperate, that they play well together. So keeping up to date with the latest version of any of your applications is probably going to help you maintain security, increase functionality, and ensure compatibility. The IT environment has been changing at a faster and faster rate. So let's take a look at some of the challenges that we're facing in the IT environment. First and foremost, critical systems like the operating system, your document management system, your practice management system, antivirus. They're all being constantly updated on different schedules for different reasons, and there may be emergency updates that you need to be aware of. Some of those updates are pushed and automatic, and that can be helpful in terms of security, but problematic in terms of how your applications play well together. Microsoft, to give them credit, has taken that on board, and they're slowly giving organizations better control over how Windows updates or Office updates are released onto users' machines. But even so, there can be undocumented changes in those systems that either the vendor isn't aware of or they just didn't bother to inform people about. And that can have a knock-on effect on other systems, other applications. And then poor QA. QA is a problem across every industry, cars, planes, trains, as well as software. Microsoft has had some really bad publicity in the last year about some of their updates, and there's a reason for that. They let a lot of their QA testers go, and they relied on the real world to do their testing for them. That's not something we have any control over, but it is something that we need to be aware of in terms of how we update and when. Our applications, they're uncoordinated, and it's not because of anything that we as IT or legal tech professionals do, it's because the vendors just don't talk to each other. There's no reason for them to coordinate their updates. And they also can be subject to variable QA on their updates. It really depends on the vendor, and that's why it's so important to work with a vendor who you trust on the QA front. Quite often vendors don't explain what's changed. For instance, Microsoft Office, you get an update, but it's hard to find out what's actually in the update and whether it's going to affect any of the other systems. So again, it's important to work with a vendor who gives you a heads up about when they're releasing and what they're releasing and why they're releasing. The greater use of cloud applications makes browser behavior ever more important. And we're already dealing with different application behavior in different browsers because browsers implement internet standards differently. But then when they start updating, either silently and automatically as in Chrome, or giving the user some choice about whether they want to upgrade, like Firefox, still those application, the cloud applications can be affected by browser updates. And then, of course, there's issues like add-in collisions in Microsoft Office, where different vendors can update their Microsoft Office add-ins, and those cause conflicts with other vendors' add-ins. Hardware, of course. I can't think of an organization that has one set of hardware on every desk and one model of laptop in everyone's hands. Typically, there's a mix of hardware, and hardware can behave, software can behave differently on different versions of hardware, especially when drivers are involved. And then, of course, there's the bring your own device, BYOD aspect, where you've got multiple operating systems, multiple form factors, and you need to test on as many as you can before you roll out to make sure that you're not going to face an irate user because an update doesn't work on their device. Another environmental factor is the business. The business wants stability. People don't want change. On the other hand, they want speed, they want the latest, they want the greatest, and you have to balance those two sometimes conflicting desires. Obviously, if something's not working, you have to fix it. You have to release the software that resolves the bug. But there is a very strong feeling that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I personally think that that can lead to complacency, and you can end up with problems that are unforeseen. So talk to the business, but also help the business understand why you need to change, when you need to change. Another big set of challenges around updating is resources. You need to know when the resources are, when the updates are available. How do you get them? What's in them? Do have any of the prerequisites changed, either environmental, like the operating system, or hardware? And do you have proper instructions on how to install, whether you're installing manually or whether you're installing by script? And if so, make sure that you update your scripts. All of these things are key points of information that any good vendor should be able to answer and ideally let you know about proactively. Another challenge is the technology that you have available. If you're a smaller organization or you're an individual, you're not going to have the kind of expensive automated application management software that can streamline deploying updates. But you also need to make sure that whatever application, if you do have that kind of software available, that it's tried, it's tested, it's industry standard, and it doesn't introduce its own variabilities or bugs. Also, whenever you're thinking about updating, you have to think about training. And that means communicating with the training team, but it also means if you have automated training videos or e-learning applications, are those up to date before you deploy your update? Last but not least, there's bandwidth, workload. Do you have the time to deploy an update? Do you have the people? What is the urgency? If something is a security fix, then it needs to go out and you need to put things aside and get the security fix in place, because security is paramount. If it's a nice to have, then of course you can push it off to some other later date. And involved with workload is also user cooperation, change management, helping people understand why it's important to update. And some people are more cooperative than others, for instance, in turning off their machines or allowing you to turn off their machines or restart their machines. All of those factors come into play, and they're challenges that everyone faces. When we talk about software installation methods and tools and skills, those all impact on how you manage your applications. Broadly speaking, there's several software installation strategies. One is manual. That's really just sitting at the machine and double-clicking startup.exe and clicking next, next, next through a wizard. That's appropriate if you're an individual or a small firm if you don't have IT support, or if you're a larger firm but you are just testing an application with a small number of users. It doesn't make sense necessarily to, at least for an initial POC, to automate the installation. You certainly would want to automate your installation once you've got it past that first go round of the POC. Because you're going to want to test the deployment. But for the initial small POC or evaluation, you might want to just install manually on people's machines. Scripting is something that I've used throughout my career. I'm a big fan of silent installs, and any application that doesn't allow silent installs is, I think, going to be a no-go for any large or medium-sized organization, because it's simply not practical to sit there and click through a installation wizard. Silent installs give you a lot of control over how you and when you roll out an update. Still, it can be fiddly, and you need to know how to write a batch file or a PowerShell script. And it still requires monitoring to make sure that the scripts aren't failing. And that's where software deployment tools come in. SCCM and Active Directory, for example, are industry standard and relatively trouble-free. And they have the automation and security and monitoring built in. They're full-featured, and they really help with getting an update out to people with the minimum of fuss on the IT side. But there's a lot of that type of solution out there, and they can be expensive. They need care, they need specialist attention by people who are very familiar with how they work and perhaps the undocumented quote-unquote features. And you also need to make sure that whatever you're doing doesn't conflict with your antivirus solution, with any kind of security policies that are in place that can interfere with how any kind of scripted update takes place. Vendors obviously play a key role in making update life easy. And in my opinion, these are some of the best practices you should look for. Regular release cycles. For instance, the Tower Microsystems has a quarterly release cycle. And there's a reason for that. One, it's clear, it's easy to understand, everybody knows about it, but also it implements a steady cadence in terms of development and QA. Random release cycles can be fine, because if something is a simple application and it doesn't need to be updated, then that's great. But if you're faced with an application or a vendor who's peppering you with updates, that's kind of a warning sign about the stability of the application or the QA, their ability to QA properly. There should be timely notifications about updates. One situation that I faced years ago was that I never got notified about updates from a certain vendor. And so users would trouble me with a bug report, and I would spend my time troubleshooting. And I'd realize I can't solve this. So I'd go to the vendor and say, look, I need to lodge a support ticket. And the vendor would say, oh, right, we fixed that in a release from 2 months ago. And that annoyed me, because if they'd told me that they'd done that, I wouldn't have had to waste my time troubleshooting. And along with that, you need complete details about update contents. In my opinion, it's not good enough for a vendor to say, oh, right, there's this enhancement, that enhancement, but not be honest or forthright about what bugs are fixed, because that's important information. It's not shameful to have bugs in software, but a vendor should be ashamed if they're hiding the bugs and not letting people know. Vendors need to have streamlined installers and clear, complete instructions about how to use them, whether it's a wizard or scripted install instructions. Unexpected things happen. Sometimes an updater will work great on 99% of the hardware and the software environments out there, but there'll be a small subset that nobody came across, and they need to be responsive when you raise an issue about that. So what are some of the things you can do to minimize updates' impact on your resources and your users? So first thing, help yourself. And here's some of my keys to success. Plan ahead. Failing to plan is planning to fail. You need to know what you need to update, when you're going to do it, and make sure you have the resources and the rollback plan in place to make that happen. You need to have control over your environment. You need to turn off auto updates whenever you can, because you need to test before you update. And again, Windows has challenged us with that, but Microsoft is getting better. Still, you need to make sure that you understand if your vendors are enabling auto updates on any of your applications, and then if it's possible to turn them off. You need to follow the vendor's instructions, i.e. read the manual. It's boring, but it's critical. There's been so many times that I have experienced a situation where somebody that I was supporting as a developer got back to me and complained that something wasn't working, and it was clearly explained in the manual how to do it. A lot of people are used to just double clicking on an MSI or an XE and expecting everything to go fine, or they're expecting that the scripted install that they had for a previous version of the application will continue to work even though they're skipping several major releases. It's always important to read the instructions. Automate repeatable processes. That's something that I've always done, just because I don't like doing the same thing manually over and over and over again. But it also gives you something repeatable. And you need to convince the business to cooperate. You need to let them know when you're going to update. You need to let them know what they need to do to allow you to do your job, i.e. Restart computers. And you also need to document what you're doing, both so that you can remember what you did 6 months ago, but also in case you get hit by a truck, someone can pick up where you left off. And last but really not least, think about simplifying your environment. When you think about updating, it's a good idea to constantly ask yourself, do I need to do this? Are there ways I can simplify the environment so that I'm not having to manage as many vendors or applications? Key is project management. And this is a sample workflow. First, you have to decide if an update is necessary. And that's about reading the instructions and reading the release notes. If there's just a couple of bugs that will never affect any of your users, or there's an enhancement that you just don't care about or you think your business doesn't care about, then you can skip the update. But if there are bugs that you think might affect your users or are in fact doing so, or if there's an enhancement that you think would be really useful, then that's an update that you should consider. You need to schedule the time and the personnel, and that involves not just the IT folks, but involves training as well. Testing and testing and testing again. First, the application manager needs to test on their own, then test within IT, then find some friendly users on the desk, on the floor if you can, to test the application in the real world before you deploy. that's the point at which you can write a script if it's the first time, or update your script if it's necessary. Staggering a rollout is a really good idea. Sometimes it's necessary in larger organizations that need to update different offices or regions on a staggered basis, for training purposes or time zone purposes, or for whatever reason. But you should always have a rollback plan. You should always have a way to stop the update and get back to you where you were before the update started. Um, a, um, a restart point in Windows is an obvious example, but also you should make sure that if you are scripting and you can't get back to the point where Windows was when you started the update, that you can at least use script to get back to where you were, for instance, changing XML files, or changing registry keys or whatever. Again, document everything you do. Have a checklist based on, and include this when you start your script, when you kick off your script, so that you can work your way through the checklist and make sure that you're not skipping any steps. And that's especially important if a team is doing it in different time zones or different regions, so that everybody is following the same script and you have a record of who did what when. Consolidating vendors and applications is going to be really key to success, because it reduces the number of things that you need to bear in mind. This is just a sample of the vendors that play in the legal tech market. Most firms have applications from a variety of these vendors. Some firms actually have duplicate applications on their website, on their in their systems. That kind of complexity makes your life more difficult. Here's the results of a recent survey of law firms asking the IT teams how many legal tech suppliers they work with. Almost 50% work with more than 10 vendors. And that's a real problem. Not only does it make your life difficult in terms of licensing and managing vendor relationships and support calls, but also it can indicate that you've got overlapping technology, where you've got multiple applications that do the same thing. And that's a real challenge to keep on top of. For instance, there's a number of firms who have some users using Microsoft Word native comparison. And then they have another subset of users who are using product A, because at one point, a partner joined from another firm and they had been using product A and they want it. So you give it to their practice group, but you don't give it to everybody for budget reasons. And then several years down the line, some other partner joins from some other firm and they don't like product A, they want product B. So you get it for that practice group. And you end up with a mix of applications that do the same thing for no particularly good reason, just because stuff happened. So it's important to reduce complexity because, like I said, it saves time managing your supplier relationships, but it also helps you streamline your migrations and your upgrades because you're having communication with fewer vendors and you're not having to duplicate your effort in terms of updating different applications that do the same thing. And it also allows you to troubleshoot easier because you're only going to one point of contact instead of several. This is something that a lot of firms are thinking about now. 60% of respondents, I would say it's more actually at this point, this is a survey result that took place last year, are looking to consolidate the number of vendors and the number of applications that they have to manage. I think if I were to leave with one point to keep in mind, it's stay informed. Just as an example that came up this week, Zoom is a new buzzy video conferencing or online meeting platform. And a few days ago, a critical security flaw that affects all Mac users was discovered. Well, it wasn't discovered this week, it was announced this week. It was discovered back in March. But because the vendor didn't do anything about it, the person who identified it went public. In my mind, it's an unforgivable security breach because the vendor also kind of responded in a bad way. But it's if you weren't paying attention to the news about that vendor and that application, you wouldn't know about it. And so your Mac users would continue to be exposed to a security breach, i.e. their webcam being hacked. And it turned out actually that it didn't affect just Mac users. That's why it's important to keep on top of the news about the applications and the vendors that you work with. And it's easier to do if you minimize the number of vendors and minimize the number of applications that you work with. In any case, we're close to ending time, and I'll leave it at there. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Chuck. And yes, we got a question. It is, you mentioned getting cooperation from the business, but what do you do about users who refuse to cooperate?
The carrot and stick. It's a tough one, and it depends on who the user is. If it's the managing partner, then you've got a real problem, and you've got some sweet talking to do. But if you get the managing partner or get the steering committee on your side, and you explain to them, this is the reason why it benefits the business to allow me to turn off machines if people don't cooperate with the instruction to turn off their machine at a certain time, or allow me to restart at 2 a.m. local time or whatever. If you can convince the business that you have a good business reason to enforce a policy of restarting machines, then that's great. In the past, I've been in situations where we had to schedule out of hours time, and we got the IT team in on a weekend, and we went around to each and every computer on the floor to make sure it was turned off. And if some of those partners' machines were still turned on, we saved their work and we turned it off for them because it just had to happen. Now that was a practice management system upgrade. But it's obviously impractical on a daily basis. So really convincing the key decision makers that you have a really good business reason to enforce restarting machines or making sure that applications are turned off when you do an update, that will stand you in good stead, but good luck.
All right, thank you. And then our final question is about update alerts. Someone asked, when will Latera Microsystems start alerting clients on software updates? I guess in the past they received consistent update alerts from the support system, but lately not so much. And do you have any insight on if we're going to include dates of product releases on the product download page on the web store website?
I'm sorry, those last few words I didn't understand. When we're going to what?
Oh, if we're going to include a date of when the software update will be released on the website.
I don't know, and that's a really good question. So let us get back to you on that. I would encourage you to lodge a support ticket about that so that it gets into the system. But Allison, if you have that person's name, we'll get back to you. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Those were all the questions we have, and we're out of time. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And just before we end, if you're curious about any upcoming webinars, please check out our website. You can go to latera.com/webinars to see all upcoming webinars as well as past recorded ones. And today's session has also been recorded, and that will also be released via email tomorrow. So you should receive a copy then. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Have a wonderful Thursday.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.